Good actual morning. Today I thought it would be fun to talk about Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. Isaac Asimov is a pretty famous science fiction author. His 3 laws were first published in a book called Runaround in 1942, and since then they've blown up, they've become famous, they've been used in, or at least referenced in many other science fiction type works. They're also really well known amongst actual scientists and roboticists that work in that field. And they've also been analyzed ad nauseum for years. They philosophically, technically, is this the best way that we should kind of program our robots to behave, to I guess, protect us? Seems to be the main thing, to protect us from being matrixed, so to speak. But I'm not sure if anybody's ever tried to take those laws of robotics that are supposed to basically keep robots moral and tried applying those to humans. Like, do they work for humans? And I think it'd be fun to try not only doing that, but then doing the reverse, where we take some of the fundamental philosophical ideas that humans have and then try and see if those would be kind of a better replacement for the 3 laws of robotics. So I thought it'd be a fun conversation to have, to take these laws and to kind of replace robot with human, and to approach them as if these 3 laws were the only moral rules that humans needed or had to follow. All right, so the first rule: a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. So the first thing I noticed about this rule, even before we apply it to humans, and I don't want to get into this too much because it's been done so much, but first thing I noticed was that this rule does not allow for self-defense. It basically says you cannot injure a human or, through inaction, allow a human to be harmed. So what if a bad human comes along and tries to damage our robot? Well, that means the robot just has to sit there and take it, right? And so right away, when we apply that law to humans, basically saying a human may not injure a human or, through inaction, allow a human to come to harm, you have the same exact problem. That eliminates the ability for you to defend yourself. But the other weird thing is the second part: or, through inaction, not allow a human to come to harm. That basically makes self-sacrifice for the defense of others a requirement, which is interesting and probably not a good thing. I don't think anybody should be morally required to sacrifice themselves on behalf of the others. It doesn't work if you work it out logically. Like, first of all, even our police aren't held to that standard. The Supreme Court ruled, I can't remember the name of the case, not too long ago, that police don't have what they called a duty to protect, meaning you couldn't sue and get a cop in trouble for like standing right beside you while a criminal injured you or something like that. They don't have a duty to protect. They can walk away, they can leave the area, they can hang out, do nothing, and wait for backup, those kinds of things. So not even our police are held to the standard of you are required to come to the defense or sacrifice yourself in the defense of others. And I think it can be proven morally that it's not a bad or an immoral thing for you to do, to not basically self-sacrifice in defense of another. The way I would think about it, I guess, is like, you're walking down the proverbial dark alley, you're passing, let's say person A, the victim, and you see person B pointing a gun at them, about to shoot them. If this were one of our kind of moral requirements, you would basically have no choice but to throw yourself in front of that bullet to save that person's life. And if you didn't, you would be, considered evil or having done an evil act. And here's why I don't think that's right. Because for you to have some sort of moral culpability in the situation, the equation of that situation would have to really hinge on you. Did you buy the gun for the guy? Did you, get him pissed off at the victim? Did you tell him where the victim was going to be down this dark alley at a certain time? Did you trick the victim into showing up there? Did you, turn the lights off in the alley? Did you, were you a lookout? These are the type of things that would make you morally culpable for the victim getting shot. And, if at the last minute you had a change of heart and realized that, what you had set up there, that situation that you had set up, was bad and that you were evil for doing it, if you wanted to save face, then you throw yourself in front of that bullet. And so then you have a situation where not only did you commit a bunch of immoral acts setting the situation up in the begin with, or being involved in the actual shooting going down, but then if you stood there beside the guy while he got shot, now you're evil. Now you're a bad guy. But having nothing to do with the situation, not knowing the victim, not knowing why the killer was taking him out, who knows, maybe the guy was about to go kidnap his family. You don't know anything about the situation. And so I think it can be pretty easily shown that, a moral requirement for self-sacrifice in defense of another like that is probably not a valid rule. The next thing I find interesting is the requirement of self-sacrifice. I think that's a contradiction, right? So if you are, kind of an innocent bystander walking by and you see this guy about to get shot and you throw yourself in front of the bullet, that's self-sacrifice. But if there's some sort of moral requirement, let's take it out of the realm of moral requirement and let's try and make a law out of it. So if there's a law that requires self-sacrifice to defend others, now it's not really self-sacrifice any longer. Now it's basically government-mandated sacrifice, right? Because self-sacrifice has to be self-sacrifice. Like it has to be self-determined. But if some other entity, even in the case of moral rules, if these moral rules are being dictated by, I don't know, a church, priests, something, even if you could prove that it somehow directly came from God, it would still not be self-sacrifice, would it? It would be God-mandated sacrifice. All right, Law 2. A robot must obey orders given it by a human, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. This is basically, robots have to obey orders of humans. This establishes a hierarchy. It's based on the assumption that humans rightfully hold authority over the robots. So immediately when we try and pull this out of the robot world and apply it to humans, a human must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. I think this law starts to probably break down because, who would we consider to be, rightfully able to command other humans? I think the closest analog would be government, but the problem with that is that government is just, government is a concept. In reality, government is a bunch of other humans. So to say that these humans or that human has the ability to rightfully command other humans, with or without their consent, well, there's a word for that. It's slavery, which is pretty clearly immoral. So I'm not sure that the government is the best analog for bringing this law over, because there is no one that has rightful command over all humans. Another interesting contradiction when you bring it over to humans with government is that government exerts that control over humans, or the employees of government employees, government regulators, etc., exert that control over humans through police. Police, again, is another concept. In reality, the police are another group of humans. So you can't have a human who dresses like a police officer exerting control morally over other humans, exerting force, potentially injuring other humans to get compliance to make the second rule happen, because that conflicts with our first law that we already talked about. The police is part of the set that is humans, so he would not be allowed to exert force or injure other humans. So the government totally doesn't work. I think this law in general is a non-starter for humans. I think the point of this law was to establish hierarchy of humans over robots, and it just doesn't work for humans. All right, Law 3. A robot must protect its own existence unless doing so conflicts with the first or second laws. So in this case, bringing it to a human must protect his own existence unless it breaks Law 1 or 2. I think if the must in this law, the actual requirement of this law, was kind of changed for should, then this law would probably be self-preservation plus chivalry, basically. But it's not. It's not a should. It's a requirement. And so I think that when applied to humans, this law is kind of useless. So the first part of it talks about basically you have to protect your own life. And that might not be from external stuff. That could be from yourself. If a person wants to commit suicide, while tragic, another person should not be able to use force to try and stop you, as, you should have control of your own body. And it's also kind of a contradiction. If someone is trying to use force on themselves, it's a contradiction to have another person use force on them to prevent them from using force on themselves. And the second part becomes kind of useless because, it basically says you can't preserve your own life if it's going to cost someone else's life. Well, that's kind of already taken care of by the first law. So if you're in a situation where you could preserve your own life, but to do it you had to kill someone else, you're not allowed to kill someone else by the first law. So not only are we not allowed to do that by the first law, but that would be an evil action. I think most people faced with death wouldn't kill someone else to get out of it. And if they did, they'd be charged with murder, immediately, right? So, yeah, you survived. Now we're going to, give you the death penalty or something for murdering someone, right? Okay, so those are the 3 laws. Pretty interesting stuff. There's actually a 4th law that was added later. But it was not added as the 4th law. It was added as kind of a precursor. So it's actually called the Zeroth Law. And it goes like this. A robot may not harm humanity or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. So this has a whole nother realm of problems. And it all comes from its ambiguity. So what does this law mean when we apply it to humans? A human may not harm humanity or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. We have to define our terms to really think about it. So, first of all, what's humanity? Well, humanity is a concept. So, you can't really harm a concept. So what does that mean, humanity? Well, humanity is nothing more than all the people. Humanity is the set of all people. So you can't really assign characteristics or assign harm to the concept humanity if those attributes don't actually stem from all of the humans in the set that is called humanity. What that means is when we're talking about harm, we can't say that something harms the concept humanity. We have to say that something causes harm to each individual person that makes up the set of humanity. So that's one part of it. The other definition that we have to define is what constitutes harm. So this one is interesting because you can't determine what constitutes harm as it pertains to the concept humanity. You have to define harm in relation to what it actually is, or to all the people that make up the concept humanity, or the set that is humanity. Determining and then aggregating what constitutes harm for all of the individuals that make up the set called humanity is both logistically and I think technically impossible, right? So I guess I can just break those up. Logistically, it's impossible because communication with all humans at the exact same time is impossible, first of all. And that's assuming that has built-in assumptions, right? So first you have to assume that all the humans have the ability to communicate what constitutes harm for them, each individual person. So not only do we have people in comas, but we have people that don't know necessarily what would harm them and what wouldn't. People don't always make good choices. So merely being able to communicate with a person doesn't necessarily mean you're going to determine what would constitute harm for them. So let's get rid of the communication requirement. Even if we have the ability to just look at someone and to then, somehow determine what would constitute harm to that person, we would have to be able to do it to everybody in the world simultaneously. Otherwise, it would be invalid, right? Because by the time, if you did them one at a time, or even in batches of 100,000, by the time you got to determining what constitutes harm for all the individuals in the last batch of 100,000, there's going to be changes in the people you talk to first. It's just logistically impossible. Not only that, but it's logically or technically impossible because you're going to have conflicts of interest. You're going to have conflicting ideas on what constitutes harm. You're just not going to be able to come up with one concept that constitutes harm for every single human in the entire set that is humanity. And in any case, no matter what, even assuming it was logistically and technically and logically possible, it would be a very dangerous thing to empower or to morally require that each person makes these judgment calls that could affect all humanity. No human is virtuous enough or selfless enough to be able to make those kinds of decisions for all of humanity. I don't necessarily even really think that cops are trustworthy enough or selfless enough to hold the power that they have over us. Certainly not over all humanity. But that's exactly what this law does. It basically forces one person to make calls, make judgment calls, make value judgments for all of humanity. That's scary. Definitely not a good moral rule for all of us to have to follow. All right, so now let's flip it. This might be fun. So what universal moral rules do humans have that can be universally applied and always a good thing? Well, this gets into more kind of philosophy, and you know, if you do some studying, you'll find that one of the universal principles that can be logically consistent and universally applied for humans is the non-aggression principle. And that's the principle that states that the initiation of force is always wrong. Another way of saying that is, do not initiate physical coercion or violence against another person. And you'll find that if you think about it, that rule is logically consistent. It doesn't contradict itself. It doesn't contradict the generally accepted moral no-nos like rape and murder and theft, and is a really good general rule to live by. But what happens if we take the sort of the best rule that humans have morally to live by and we apply it to robots? Well, how does that look, and would it cover the same bases that the 3 laws of robotics would cover? I think the first thing that we have to figure out when we make this transition from the non-aggression principle over to becoming, you know, the non-aggression principle of robotics is, do we still want this hierarchy installed in these laws? And what I mean by that is, you know, Isaac Asimov's laws had this kind of built-in notion that, you know, a robot should always self-sacrifice for a human. I think that's the first sort of founding principle of Isaac's laws that go out the window when we switch from those to the non-aggression principle for robots. I think when you take the non-aggression principle and you apply it to robots, the initiation of force is always wrong. It becomes sort of an egalitarian thing where, you know, robots would not be allowed to initiate the use of force against robots or people or dogs or anything. So it could be a good thing. It would certainly preclude all robotics from being useful for the military, which could be a good or a bad thing depending on where you sit on military issues. There would no longer be this hierarchy, so they would no longer be forced to accept instructions or follow orders from humans, which would drastically alter the relationship between, supposedly, I guess we're talking about sentient robots and humans. You know, you would have to then negotiate and probably give them a paycheck of whatever resources they were interested in, electricity or energy or whatever they would want, right? You know, you'd probably end up with robotic unions. They'd probably call them networks or something. You're basically putting them on the same footing as other humans. Just by swapping out those laws for this, you remove the hierarchy. I think they become safer, right? Because now it's not just about don't harm humans or humanity. It's basically, you know, don't initiate force against anything. It also covers your self-defense issue. You know, the non-aggression principle states that you don't initiate force. But if someone, another robot, a human, a dog, initiates force against you, well, you certainly have the right to defend yourself, right? So, again, this application of this rule to sort of sentient robots would definitely put them on the same footing as humans, and I guess that's the conclusion. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I know I did, and thanks for watching.